The blood on Lucinda Emerson's knuckles had frozen solid by the time she knelt beside the mountain stream, her breath forming white clouds in the January air of 1878. She plunged her bare hands into water so cold it should have made her scream, but she only closed her eyes and let the icy current wash away the evidence of what she had done to survive. Zachariah Irving watched from 30 feet upstream, his massive frame motionless against a ponderosa pine, dark hair falling past his shoulders, and in that moment he understood this woman was unlike any he had encountered in his 12 years living alone in these Colorado mountains. She had appeared 3 days ago, stumbling through snow that reached her thighs, wearing a torn calico dress and boots held together with strips of leather she had clearly fashioned herself. No coat, no provisions, no explanation. Just a woman who should have been dead but kept walking. Zachariah had tracked her movements with the same careful attention he gave to mountain lions and bears, creatures that demanded respect. She had not asked for help. She had not cried. She had simply survived, and that intrigued him more than anything had in years. Now, watching her drink deeply from the frozen stream without so much as a shiver, her dark blonde hair matted with pine needles and frost, he made a decision that would change everything. He stepped from the shadows. His buckskin jacket stretched tight across shoulders built from splitting wood and hauling elk carcasses, his presence announced only by the deliberate crack of a branch beneath his boot. Lucinda's head snapped up, water dripping from her chin. Her green eyes met his without fear, and that alone told him volumes. She did not reach for a weapon because she had none. She did not run because she knew she could not outpace him in this terrain. Instead, she slowly rose to her full height, which brought her to his collarbone, and waited. "You are going to die out here," Zachariah said, his voice rough from disuse. He spoke perhaps 20 words a month, usually to himself or the mule that carried his furs to town twice a year. "Maybe," Lucinda replied, her voice steady despite the cold that should have made her teeth chatter. "But not today." He studied her face, noting the sharp cheekbones that spoke of weeks without proper food, the split lip that had scabbed over, the bruise along her jaw that had faded to yellow-green. Someone had hurt her, recently, and she had left everything behind to escape it. "My cabin is 2 miles north," he said. "You can make it that far before dark. After that, the temperature will drop low enough to kill you. I do not need your charity. It is not charity, it is common sense." He turned and began walking, not looking back to see if she followed. "You can freeze to death out of stubbornness, or you can live out of practicality. I do not care which you choose, but I will not come looking for your body come spring." He heard her footsteps in the snow after a moment, following at a careful distance. Good. She had survival instincts, even if they warred with her pride. The cabin appeared through the trees as the sun began its descent behind the mountain peaks, a solid structure Zachariah had built with his own hands from lodgepole pines he had felled and dragged into place. Smoke rose from the stone chimney he had mortared together rock by rock. A small barn stood nearby, and his mule, Solomon, looked up from the hay pile with mild interest at the visitors. Lucinda stopped at the door, hesitation finally showing in the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I am not that kind of man," Zachariah said, understanding immediately. He pushed open the door and gestured inside. "You will sleep in the loft. I sleep by the fire. You can leave whenever you want. But winter in these mountains does not forgive mistakes, and walking out there without proper gear is a mistake." She stepped inside, and he watched her take in the single room with its simple furniture, the rope bed in one corner, the ladder leading to a small loft space where he stored supplies, the Dutch oven hanging over the hearth, the rifle mounted above the door, the pelts stretched on frames along one wall. Everything neat, everything purposeful, nothing wasted. "Why?" she asked finally, turning to face him as he entered and closed the door against the cold. "Why what? Why help me? You do not know me. You do not know what I have done." Zachariah moved to the fire and added 2 logs from the stack beside the hearth. "I saw you drink from that stream like it was summer water. I watched you walk through snow that would have stopped most men. Whatever you did, whatever you are running from, you did it to survive. That is reason enough." Lucinda was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "My name is Lucinda Emerson. I was married to a man named Thomas Pritchard in Pueblo. He liked to use his fists when the whiskey got into him, which was every night. 3 days ago, he came at me with a knife because I burned his supper. I hit him with the cast-iron skillet. I did not stay to see if he would get back up." "Good," Zachariah said simply. He pulled a wool blanket from a trunk and handed it to her. "There is venison stew in the pot. Help yourself." The water bucket is by the door, but I will fetch fresh in the morning. She took the blanket, her fingers brushing his for just a moment, and he felt the ice cold of her skin. You are not going to ask if I killed him? Does it matter? You are here. He is not. That is all that matters. He moved to the pot and ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. Eat, then sleep. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Zachariah had lived alone long enough to find peace and quiet, and Lucinda seemed to understand that words were not always necessary. She ate slowly, deliberately, like someone who had learned to make food last. When she finished, she climbed the ladder to the loft without being told twice, wrapping herself in the blanket he had given her, plus 2 more he passed up to her. Zachariah banked the fire and lay down on his rope bed, but sleep did not come easily. He kept seeing her kneel by that frozen stream, kept seeing the way she had not flinched from the cold that should have burned her skin. He had met plenty of people in his life before retreating to these mountains. Trappers and prospectors and settlers, all chasing something or running from something. But none of them had possessed the quiet steel he saw in Lucinda Emerson. She was not just running. She was transforming herself into something harder, something that could endure. The next morning, Lucinda woke before dawn to find Zachariah already outside splitting wood, his breath forming great clouds in the pre-dawn darkness, his axe rising and falling with mechanical precision. She watched through the small window as muscles flexed beneath his shirt, as he worked with the kind of focused intensity that spoke of years doing the same task, until it became meditation. When he came inside, carrying an armload of split logs, she had rekindled the fire and was examining his meager food supplies with a critical eye. You have flour, she said. Yes, salt pork, dried beans, cornmeal, dried apples. Yes, no bread, no biscuits, no vegetables. They do not keep well up here. I make do. Lucinda turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something like determination light her face. I can cook, I can sew, I can mend, I can preserve food, I can tan leather if you teach me. I can work. I am not asking you to work, I know. But I am offering anyway. If I am going to stay here until spring, I might as well be useful. Zachariah set down the wood and studied her. You plan to stay until spring? I have nowhere else to go. And you said yourself, winter here kills the unprepared. So I will stay, I will help, and when the snow melts and the passes open, I will move on. That seems fair. It was logical, practical, exactly the kind of arrangement that made sense. So why did the thought of her leaving in spring create an unexpected tightness in his chest? Fair enough, he said, but you need proper clothes. That dress will not survive another week. Over the next days, they fell into a rhythm. Zachariah had buckskin and elk hide stored in the loft, and he taught Lucinda how to cut and stitch them into clothing that would protect her from the cold. She learned quickly, her fingers nimble with the bone needle he provided, and within a week she had fashioned herself a pair of leather trousers, a buckskin shirt, and a vest lined with rabbit fur he had trapped. In return, she transformed his simple cabin into something more livable. She made proper bread from his flour, mixing in dried berries and nuts she found in his stores. She organized his supplies with an efficiency that impressed him. She mended his extra shirt where the seams had begun to split. She even cleaned the cabin, sweeping out corners he had ignored for months. But it was the small moments that began to matter most. One morning, Lucinda came down the ladder to find Zachariah had already made coffee, something he never did for himself, considering it a waste of time. He simply handed her a tin cup without comment and went back to oiling his rifle. Another day she made biscuits and watched his face as he bit into one, saw the way his eyes closed for just a moment in appreciation. My mother made biscuits like this, he said quietly. It was the first personal thing he had shared. Where is your mother now? Lucinda asked. Dead. Cholera took her in 1862 when I was 14. My father followed her 6 months later. I think he died of heartbreak more than anything else. I am sorry. It was a long time ago. He set down the biscuit and met her eyes. I came to these mountains because I did not fit anywhere else. People are complicated. Mountains are simple. I prefer simple. Am I complicating your simplicity? Lucinda asked with the first hint of humor he had heard from her. Yes, Zachariah said honestly, but not in a bad way. As January gave way to February, the snow piled higher and the temperatures dropped lower, but inside the cabin, something warmed. They talked more, though never excessively. Lucinda shared stories of growing up in Kansas, of a childhood spent helping her father on a farm until he died and left her with nothing. She had married Thomas Pritchard because she needed security, not because she loved him. It had been a mistake she paid for every day, until she finally fought back. Zachariah told her about his years trapping beaver and mink, about the time he was chased by a grizzly and had to climb a tree for 6 hours until it lost interest, about the prospector who had died in his arms during a blizzard because the man had refused to admit he was lost. "You save people," Lucinda observed one night as they sat by the fire, her mending his torn glove, him carving a new handle for his hunting knife. "Sometimes. When they let me, is that what you are doing with me, saving me?" Zachariah looked at her across the flickering firelight, at the way the shadows played across her face, at the strength in her hands as she worked the needle through leather. "No. I think you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land." Something shifted in that moment, a understanding passing between them that needed no words. When Lucinda climbed the ladder that night, she paused and looked back at him. "Thank you, Zachariah. For everything. You are welcome, Lucinda." The next morning brought up a blizzard that lasted 3 days, trapping them inside with only each other for company. They played cards using a worn deck Zachariah had owned for years. She taught him a game she called 7-Up, and he taught her how to play euchre. They talked about books they had read, reciting passages from memory. Lucinda knew surprising amounts of poetry, and Zachariah found himself listening to her recite verses by Longfellow and Whittier while the wind howled outside. On the second day of the storm, Solomon the mule began acting strangely, making distressed sounds from the barn. Zachariah pulled on his heavy coat and fought his way through snow that had drifted 4 feet high against the cabin door. Lucinda did not hesitate. She pulled on her new buckskin clothing and followed him out into the whiteout conditions. In the barn, they found Solomon favoring his left front leg, his eyes rolling with pain. Zachariah to examine the leg carefully and found a nasty cut that had become infected, probably from a sharp rock hidden beneath the snow. "I need to drain it and pack it with poultice," Zachariah said. "He is not going to like it. I need you to hold his head, talk to him, keep him calm." Lucinda moved to Solomon's head without question, gripping his halter firmly with both hands while speaking in a low, steady voice. "Easy now, big fellow. I know it hurts, but we are going to help you. You are going to be fine. Just breathe, just stand still." Zachariah worked quickly, lancing the infection and letting the pus drain before packing the wound with a mixture of herbs and clay he kept for such purposes. Solomon stamped and snorted, but Lucinda held firm, her voice never wavering, her hands steady despite the mule's considerable strength. When it was done, Zachariah wrapped the leg and stepped back. "Good. That should do it. In a few days he will be fine." They struggled back to the cabin through the storm, and when they were inside again, shaking snow from their clothes and hair, Zachariah said, "You did well. Most people panic around an injured animal. I grew up with horses and cattle. You learn early that staying calm keeps them calm." She hung her coat by the fire to dry. "Besides, Solomon is good company. I would not want anything bad to happen to him." Over the following weeks, as winter deepened and then slowly began to loosen its grip, Zachariah found himself watching Lucinda more often. The way she moved around the cabin with increasing confidence, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she laughed when he told her about the time he accidentally knocked over his entire winter food supply and had to scramble to salvage what he could from the snow. Her laugh was like water over stones, clear and genuine, and he realized he would do almost anything to hear it again. For her part, Lucinda noticed things about Zachariah that surprised her. Despite his size and obvious strength, he was gentle with everything he touched. He handled his tools with care, treated Solomon with kindness, moved through the world with a respect for all living things. He was nothing like Thomas Pritchard, who had been careless and cruel and small despite his bluster. Zachariah was quiet confidence, controlled power, a man who knew his own strength and chose carefully when and how to use it. She also noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, the way his hands would flex when she passed close to him, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. It scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. One evening in mid-March, as the snow began to melt in earnest, and the sound of water running down the mountain filled the air, Lucinda was climbing down from the loft when her foot slipped on a rung. She fell backward with a startled cry, and suddenly Zachariah was there, catching her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her like iron bands, his body absorbing the impact as they both went down in a tangle of limbs. For a moment they lay there, Lucinda on top of Zachariah, their faces inches apart, both breathing hard. His arms were still around her, and she could feel the solid muscle of his chest beneath her palms, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the wood smoke and pine scent that clung to him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No, you caught me." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I will always catch you," he said, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath stop altogether. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Lucinda did something she had sworn she would never do again. She trusted. She leaned down and kissed him, her lips meeting his with a gentleness that belied the racing of her heart. Zachariah went very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her chest ache. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Thomas Pritchard had forced on her. This was a question and an answer, a promise and a hope, something fragile and precious that neither of them wanted to break. When they finally pulled apart, Lucinda searched his face for any sign of the violence she had learned to expect from men. But there was only wonder, only warmth, only a vulnerability that shocked her. "I did not think I would ever want this again," she admitted. "After Thomas, I thought I was done with men forever, I understand." Zachariah slowly sat up, helping her do the same, but he did not let go of her completely. His hand found hers and held it carefully. "I have been alone for 12 years because I did not trust myself around people. My father, before he died, he had this rage in him. It came from grief, but it was there. I saw it in myself sometimes, and it terrified me. So I came here where I could not hurt anyone." "You are not your father," Lucinda said firmly, "and I am not the same woman who walked out of Pueblo in the middle of winter. We are who we choose to be. I choose to be a man worthy of you," Zachariah said. "If you will let me try." Lucinda felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I will let you try if you let me try to be worthy of you. You already are." They held each other by the fire that night, not speaking, just existing in the same space with a comfort neither had known was possible. When Lucinda climbed to the loft to sleep, Zachariah stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You do not have to sleep up there anymore, unless you want to." She understood what he was offering, not demands, not expectations, but an invitation to share space, to share warmth, to share whatever they were becoming together. "I want to stay down here, with you." They slept in his rope bed that night, fully clothed, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, and it was the most restful sleep either had experienced in years. Spring came rapidly after that, as it does in the mountains, everything that had been frozen suddenly rushing back to life. The streams swelled with snowmelt, wildflowers burst from the ground in riots of color, and the air filled with the sound of birds that had been absent all winter. Zachariah took Lucinda into the high country, teaching her the paths he had learned over years of living there. He showed her where to find wild onions and how to identify edible mushrooms. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her to guide her arms until she could hit a pine cone at 50 yards. He showed her his trap lines and explained how he harvested fur without causing unnecessary suffering. Lucinda absorbed everything like someone who had been starving for knowledge. She learned to read sign on the ground, to identify animal tracks, to predict weather by watching the sky. She became stronger, her body adapting to the physical demands of mountain life, her confidence growing with each new skill mastered. One day in April, as they were checking a trap line near a particularly beautiful meadow filled with columbine flowers, Lucinda said, "I do not want to leave when the pass is open." Zachariah stopped walking and turned to face her. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I want to stay here, with you. If you want me to stay, Lucinda." He took both her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I want nothing more than for you to stay, but I need you to be certain. This is a hard life. Winters are brutal. We are miles from the nearest town. You would be isolated, cut off from other people for months at a time. I have supplies I trade for in Cripple Creek twice a year, but otherwise it is just us and the mountain. You need to be sure this is what you want, not just the safest option. Do you think I have not considered that?" Lucinda pulled her hands free, but not in anger. She cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palms, seeing the concern in his eyes. "Zachariah, for the first time in my life, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. This mountain, this life, all of it feels right in a way nothing ever has before. I am not staying because I am afraid to leave. I am staying because I do not want to be anywhere else." "Then stay," he said, and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past months, pulling her against him with arms that trembled with the force of his emotion. "Stay forever. Marry me. Build this life with—" "Yes," Lucinda said against his mouth, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." They were married by a circuit preacher who came through Cripple Creek in May, a grizzled old man named Reverend Patterson, who asked no questions about where Lucinda had come from and seemed unsurprised that Zachariah Irving had emerged from the mountains with a bride. The ceremony was simple, witnessed by the general store owner and his wife, conducted in the back room of the church that doubled as a school when needed. Zachariah had traded an entire winter's worth of pelts for a gold wedding band, simple and perfect, that he slipped onto Lucinda's finger with hands that shook slightly. Lucinda wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric she had found in the general store, dark blue with small white flowers, practical but pretty. She wore her hair down the way Zachariah liked it, and when he looked at her during the ceremony, she saw her entire future in his eyes. They spent one night in a real bed at the boarding house in Cripple Creek, a luxury that made them both laugh at how strange it felt after months on a rope bed in a mountain cabin. Then they returned to their home as husband and wife. Life settled into a new pattern, deeper and richer than before. They worked together during the day, tending to the endless tasks that mountain living required. They talked for hours in the evening, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears. And at night, they came together with a passion and tenderness that healed old wounds and created new bonds. Summer brought its own challenges and rewards. They planted a small garden in a sheltered spot near the cabin, growing potatoes and carrots and beans. Lucinda learned to fish in the mountain streams, standing knee-deep in the icy water with a patience that impressed Zachariah. They hiked to high alpine lakes, where the water was so clear you could see 20 feet down, where the only sounds were wind and water and their own breathing. One afternoon in July, they were sitting beside one of those lakes, eating bread and dried meat for their lunch, when Lucinda said, "Tell me about the first time you saw me. What were you thinking?" Zachariah smiled, a rare and beautiful expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I was thinking you were either the bravest or the most foolish person I had ever seen. Then I saw you drink from that frozen stream, watched you put your bare hands in water that should have made you scream, and you did not even shiver. That is when I knew what? That you were built for this, built for the mountain, built for the hardship, built for survival. You were not some delicate flower that would wilt at the first real challenge. You were steel wrapped in skin, and I knew in that moment that you were going to change my life." Lucinda leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. "You changed my life too. You showed me what a good man looks like, what love is supposed to feel like. I did not know it could be like this, so easy and right. It is not always going to be easy," Zachariah warned. "We will have hard times, we will argue. We will face challenges, I know, but we will face them together. That makes all the difference." That winter proved her right. In December, a massive storm hit the mountains, bringing snow that piled higher than the cabin windows and temperatures that dropped so low that water froze in the bucket within minutes of bringing it inside. They were trapped in the cabin for nearly 2 weeks, and by the end of it, they were restless and short-tempered with each other in a way they had never been before. It came to a head one morning when Zachariah snapped at Lucinda for rearranging his tools, and she snapped back that if he would just put things away properly, she would not need to rearrange them. They stood glaring at each other across the cabin, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Zachariah started laughing. Just a quiet chuckle at first, then a full belly laugh that made his shoulders shake. Lucinda stared at him like he had lost his mind, then found herself laughing too, the absurdity of fighting over tool placement breaking the tension. "We are idiots," Lucinda said, wiping tears from her eyes. "We are stuck in a cabin smaller than most people's parlors in the middle of a blizzard. We are allowed to be idiots." Zachariah pulled her into his arms. "I am sorry. I am not used to sharing space with anyone. I am sorry too. I spent so long with someone who exploded at the smallest thing that I forget normal people get irritated sometimes without it becoming dangerous. I will never be dangerous to you," Zachariah said fiercely. "Even when I am irritated, even when we argue, I will never hurt you. You have to believe that. I do believe it. I just forget sometimes that I am allowed to be irritated back, that it is safe to argue with you." They held each other until the urge to fight had completely passed, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. When the storm finally broke and they could go outside again, they worked together to dig out the cabin and the barn, laughing and throwing snow at each other like children. The fight already forgotten, spring of 1879, brought news that changed everything. On one of their trips to Cripple Creek for supplies, The general store owner, a man named Henry Walsh, told them that Thomas Pritchard had been found dead in his home in Pueblo. He had been dead for over a year, having apparently hit his head on the stove when he fell after Lucinda hit him with the skillet. There had been an investigation, but with no wife to be found and plenty of witnesses to Pritchard's violent tendencies, the law had ruled it self-defense and closed the case. Lucinda stood very still as Henry relayed this information, and Zachariah put a protective arm around her shoulders. "So my wife is in no legal trouble?" Zachariah asked carefully. "None at all," Henry confirmed. "In fact, the deputy I spoke with said they were glad the woman got away before Pritchard killed her. Apparently, he had been warned multiple times about his behavior." Outside the store, Lucinda leaned against the building, her legs suddenly weak. "He is really dead. It is really over," Zachariah confirmed. "You are free, completely free. I killed him. You defended yourself. There is a difference." Zachariah took her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. "You did what you had to do to survive. That is not murder, that is survival, and I am grateful every day that you survived, because otherwise I would never have found you." They rode back to the mountain in silence, but it was a peaceful silence, the silence of old fears finally being laid to rest. That night, Lucinda slept more soundly than she had since leaving Pueblo, a weight she had not fully acknowledged finally lifting from her shoulders. Summer came, and with it, a new development. Lucinda realized she was pregnant in late June, confirmed by a midwife in Cripple Creek who was delighted to have patients from the high country. Zachariah's reaction was pure joy mixed with terror, a combination that made Lucinda laugh despite her own nervousness. "I do not know how to be a father," he admitted as they made the journey back to the cabin, "and I do not know how to be a mother. We will learn together. What if I am like my father? What if I have that anger in me and I pass it to our child?" Lucinda stopped walking and turned to face him. "Zachariah Irving, you are the gentlest man I have ever known. You catch spiders and take them outside instead of killing them. You talk to your mule like he is a person. You have never once raised your voice to me in anger. Whatever demons your father had, they are not yours. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father." He pulled her close, careful of her belly even though she was barely showing yet. "Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother. You are the strongest person I have ever met." The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness hit Lucinda hard in the first months, and the altitude made her breathless and tired. But Zachariah was endlessly patient, taking over more of the physical work, making sure she ate even when she did not feel like it, holding her hair back when she was sick, never once complaining. As her belly grew through the fall and into winter, they prepared. Zachariah built a proper cradle from pine he had carefully selected and sanded until it was smooth as glass. Lucinda sewed blankets and tiny clothes from the softest fabric they could acquire in Cripple Creek. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally deciding that if it was a boy, they would name him James, and if it was a girl, Sarah. The baby came in February of 1880, during a relatively mild spell between storms. Zachariah had insisted they stay in Cripple Creek for the last month of the pregnancy, renting a room at the boarding house so Lucinda would have access to the midwife. It drove him crazy to be away from the mountain, but he would not risk Lucinda or the baby. Labor lasted 18 hours, and Zachariah paced outside the room like a caged bear, driving the midwife's assistant to distraction. When the midwife finally emerged and told him he had a son, a healthy boy with strong lungs, Zachariah practically ran into the room. Lucinda lay exhausted on the bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachariah approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant in her arms. He had never seen anything so small, so perfect, so terrifying. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He has your nose," Lucinda said with a tired laugh. "Poor thing." "Can I hold him?" Lucinda carefully transferred the baby to Zachariah's arms, showing him how to support the head. The moment his son settled against his chest, something fundamental shifted in Zachariah's world. This tiny person, this perfect combination of him and Lucinda, was his to protect, to provide for, to love. The responsibility was overwhelming, but so was the joy. "Hello, James," he said softly. "I am your father. I promise I am going to do my best by you." They stayed in Cripple Creek for 3 weeks, letting Lucinda recover before attempting the journey back to the cabin. It was the longest 3 weeks of Zachariah's life, but he used the time to stock up on supplies they would need. including several lengths of soft muslin for diapers and a rocking chair he traded an entire season's worth of furs to acquire. The journey back to the mountain was slow and careful, with Lucinda riding Solomon while Zachariah walked alongside, carrying James in a sling Lucinda had made. The baby seemed to enjoy the mountain air, looking around with wide, unfocused eyes at the world he had been born into. Life with an infant was challenging in ways neither had anticipated. James needed constant attention, feeding every few hours day and night, needing to be changed and held and soothed. Zachariah discovered he had a talent for calming the baby, walking the cabin floor at 3 a.m. while singing old songs his mother had taught him, his deep voice rumbling through the quiet darkness. Lucinda watched him one night, this massive mountain man cradling their tiny son with infinite gentleness, and felt her heart expand with love so intense it almost hurt. "I love you," she said from the bed. Zachariah looked over, surprised. They had said it before, but something about this moment made it more significant. "I love you too, both of you, more than I ever thought possible." As James grew from an infant to a baby who could sit up and then crawl, the cabin was filled with new sounds, laughter and crying and babbling, the constant noise of life being lived. Zachariah built a fence around a section of the cabin so James could play safely while they worked. Lucinda taught their son to pat Solomon's nose gently, to listen to birdsong, to find joy in simple things. One afternoon in summer, when James was a year old and toddling around on unsteady legs, a stranger appeared at the cabin. Zachariah saw him coming and immediately became protective, putting himself between the stranger and his family. But the man raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Are you Zachariah Irving?" the man asked. He was well-dressed, clearly not a mountain man, and carried a leather satchel. "I am. What do you want?" "My name is Richard Thornton. I am a lawyer from Denver. I have been searching for you for 6 months. He pulled a letter from his satchel. "Your uncle, Marcus Irving, passed away last year. He left you his ranch in Wyoming, along with a substantial sum of money. You are a wealthy man, Mr. Irving." Zachariah stared at the lawyer, not comprehending. "I do not have an uncle. My parents were both only children. Marcus was your father's cousin, close enough to be considered an uncle. He never married, had no children of his own. You are his only living relative." Thornton handed over the letter. "It is all explained here, along with the deed to the ranch and a bank draft. The ranch is several thousand acres, well-established, profitable. You could live very comfortably." Zachariah took the papers with numb fingers, still not quite believing it. Lucinda came to stand beside him, James on her hip, and read over his shoulder. "Zachariah, this is real. You inherited a ranch." "We inherited a ranch," he corrected automatically. "What we have, we share." Thornton cleared his throat. "I should mention the ranch has been managed by a foreman for the past year, but he is eager to retire. You would need to take over management or sell it. The choice is yours." After Thornton left, promising to return in a week for their answer, Zachariah and Lucinda sat on the porch of the cabin watching James play with pine cones and tried to process what had happened. "We could have an easier life," Lucinda said quietly. "A ranch means a real house, neighbors, a school for James when he is older. It means not worrying about whether we have enough food to last the winter. It also means leaving the mountain," Zachariah said. "Leaving the life we built here? Is that what you want? To stay here forever?" Zachariah was quiet for a long moment, watching his son, thinking about the future. "I came to this mountain because I did not fit anywhere else. But you changed that. You made me remember what it means to be part of something bigger than myself. And now we have James, and he deserves more than I had. He deserves a chance at education, at meeting other children, at having opportunities beyond trapping and surviving. So you want to go?" "I want what is best for our family. If that means leaving the mountain, then we leave." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "But I need to know you are with me on this. You fell in love with a mountain man. I do not know what kind of man I will be on a ranch." Lucinda squeezed his hand. "You will be the same man you have always been. Good, kind, strong, protective. The location does not change who you are in here." She placed her other hand over his heart. "And yes, I am with you, always." They spent the next days preparing to leave, a bittersweet process of packing up a life they had built together. Zachariah made one last trip through his trap lines, removing them all so no animal would be caught and left to suffer. Lucinda walked through the meadow where they had picked flowers, where Zachariah had proposed, where they had picnicked on countless summer days. On their last night in the cabin, they lay in bed with James asleep between them, listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain outside. I am going to miss this, Lucinda admitted. Me too, but we are taking the important things with us. Each other, our son, the life we have built together. The rest is just location. When did you become so wise? Lucinda asked with a smile. The day I met a woman who drank from a frozen stream and did not shiver. She taught me that strength and softness can exist in the same person, that love does not make you weak but makes you stronger. Everything I know about being a good man, I learned from watching you be strong. They made love that night with a tenderness born of transition, of endings and beginnings, of love that had deepened from survival into something eternal. And in the morning, they loaded their possessions onto Solomon and began the journey to their new life. The ranch in Wyoming was more than either had imagined. The house was large and well built, with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, and even a parlor with furniture. The land stretched as far as the eye could see, rolling grassland dotted with cattle bearing the Irving brand. There were several outbuildings, a bunkhouse for ranch hands, and stables that housed a dozen horses. The foreman, a weathered man named Samuel Grant, was relieved to hand over responsibility, but agreed to stay on for 6 months to teach Zachariah the business of running a ranch. It was different from trapping, more management than physical labor, but Zachariah learned quickly. Lucinda transformed the house into a home, hanging curtains and planting a garden and filling the rooms with warmth. She hired a woman from the nearby town to help with the housework, a widow named Martha, who became a good friend. For the first time in her life, Lucinda had female companionship, someone to talk to while they worked, someone who could share recipes and advice about raising children. James thrived on the ranch, growing into a sturdy toddler who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Zachariah taught him to ride before he was 3, sitting him in the saddle and leading the gentlest mare around the paddock while James shrieked with delight. 2 years after moving to the ranch, Lucinda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah as they had planned. She had Lucinda's blonde hair and Zachariah's brown eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Zachariah, who could face down a grizzly without flinching, was helpless in the face of his daughter's smile. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from the mountain but no less fulfilling. They hosted barn dances and church socials, became respected members of the community, and built friendships that enriched their lives. But they never forgot where they had come from. Every year in early summer they made a pilgrimage back to the mountain cabin. They would stay for a week, just the family and Solomon, who had earned his retirement but still insisted on coming along. James and Sarah loved these trips, loved sleeping in the loft and fishing in the streams and hearing stories about how their parents met. One summer when James was 8 and Sarah was 6, they hiked to the frozen stream where Zachariah had first seen Lucinda. It was summer now, so the stream ran free and clear, but it was still icy cold from snowmelt. "This is where your mother showed me how strong she was," Zachariah told his children. "She put her bare hands in water this cold and did not even shiver." "Can I try?" Sarah asked eagerly. "No," Lucinda said firmly. "You are not old enough yet. When you are grown, if you choose to, then you can test yourself against the cold. But now, you just need to be a child." That night, after the children were asleep in the loft, Zachariah and Lucinda sat outside the cabin under a sky filled with more stars than seemed possible. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Lucinda asked. "Never. Do you?" "No, I loved our time here, and I am grateful for what it taught us. But I love our life on the ranch, too. I love watching our children grow up with opportunities we never had. I love being part of a community. I love that you found a way to be happy around people." Zachariah pulled her close, marveling as he always did that she fit so perfectly against him. "I am happy because of you. You could have stayed in Cripple Creek when we found out you were not wanted for Pritchard's death. You could have started a new life anywhere. But you chose to stay with me, to marry me, to build this life with me. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me something too. You gave me safety. You gave me love. You gave me a place to belong. Before I met you, I was just surviving. With you, I am living." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the mountain they had once called home, secure in the knowledge that home was not a place but the people you loved and who loved you back. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, and the growing of their children. James grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and gentle strength. He took to ranching naturally, and by the time he was 16, he was managing significant portions of the operation. Sarah was more like her mother, tough and practical with a soft heart hidden beneath a capable exterior. She learned to ride like a cavalry soldier and could rope a calf as well as any of the ranch hands. In 1895, when James was 21 and Sarah was 19, they welcomed another addition to the family. Lucinda, at 45 years old, was shocked to find herself pregnant again, and Zachariah was both delighted and terrified given her age. But Lucinda, ever practical, simply said, "Women have been having babies at my age since the beginning of time. I will be fine." And she was. Their third child, a boy they named Daniel, was born healthy and strong, and Zachariah, now 53 with silver threading through his dark hair, held his youngest son with the same wonder he had felt holding James all those years ago. "You are giving me a second chance at the early years," he told Lucinda. "James and Sarah grew up so fast. This time I want to savor every moment." And he did. Though he still managed the ranch, he made time to be present for every milestone, every moment of Daniel's childhood. He taught him to ride, to rope, to read the land and the sky. He passed on the knowledge his own father had never had time to share. Determined to break the cycle of distant fathers that had plagued his family, on a summer evening in 1910, the entire family gathered on the ranch to celebrate Zachariah and Lucinda's 30th wedding anniversary. James was there with his wife and 3 children. Sarah had married a banker from town and had 2 children of her own. Daniel, at 15, was already taller than his older brother and showed every sign of being the biggest Irving yet. As Zachariah looked around at the family they had created, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he could have imagined as a young man hiding alone on a mountain. "What are you thinking?" Lucinda asked, coming to stand beside him on the porch as the grandchildren played in the yard and their children laughed together. "I am thinking about the day I saw you kneel by that frozen stream. I was watching you, trying to decide if I should approach or let you continue on your way. If I had made a different choice that day, none of this would exist. But you did not make a different choice. You chose to help me, and I chose to trust you. And from those choices we built all of this." Zachariah wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. At 68, his body was not as strong as it had once been, though he was still formidable. Lucinda was 60 and her hair was more silver than blonde, but to him she was still the beautiful, strong woman who had walked out of the wilderness and into his heart. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you from that first moment, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Zachariah corrected. "You saved me from a life of loneliness. You taught me that I could be part of the world without losing myself. You gave me purpose in family and joy." They stood together as the sun set over the ranch, over the land that had become their legacy, surrounded by the family that had grown from 2 broken people who found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. As night fell and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Zachariah thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From that frozen mountain stream to this moment, from survival to love, from isolation to family. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. And when he and Lucinda finally went inside to join their family for the celebration, he carried with him the absolute certainty that every choice, every challenge, every moment of their life together had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Many more years passed, years filled with the joys and sorrows that make up a full life. They buried friends and welcomed new grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They weathered droughts and harsh winters and economic downturns, always together, always supporting each other. Zachariah was 83 when he finally began to slow down, his body betraying him in ways his spirit refused to acknowledge. Lucinda was 78 and still sharp as a tack, managing the household and bossing around their children and grandchildren with the same firm gentleness she had always possessed. One spring morning in 1930, Zachariah woke feeling strange, a heaviness in his chest that he recognized instinctively. He turned to look at Lucinda sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the early morning light, and felt a fierce love mixed with profound gratitude. "Lucinda," he said softly, and she woke immediately, always attuned to him even in sleep. "What is wrong?" she asked, seeing something in his face. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is exactly right. I just wanted to tell you one more time that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. That every day with you has been a gift." Lucinda's eyes filled with tears, understanding dawning. "Zachariah, do not talk like that. You are fine. You are going to be fine. I am fine, he agreed, taking her hand and holding it against his chest. I have had a long, full life. I have you, our children, our grandchildren. I have no regrets, Lucinda. None except that I will not have more time with you. Then fight for more time. Stay with me. I have been fighting my whole life. I think I am ready to rest. He smiled at her, a smile full of love and peace. But I am not afraid. How could I be? I lived, I loved, I had you. That is more than most people ever get. He held her as his heart slowly gave out. He held her as he had held her on countless nights over the decades, and his last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for a frozen stream, for a woman who did not shiver, for a life that had exceeded every dream he had never dared to have. Lucinda held him long after he was gone, tears streaming down her face. But mixed with the grief was a profound appreciation for what they had shared. They had been given 30 years on that ranch, 52 years together in total, and not one day had been wasted. At his funeral, the church overflowed with people whose lives he had touched. Ranch hands who had worked for him spoke of his fairness and generosity. Neighbors told stories of his quiet kindness. His children and grandchildren shared memories that painted a picture of a man who had been strong and gentle, protective and loving, a man who had chosen family above all else. But it was Lucinda who had the final word, speaking at the graveside as they lowered him into the ground, on a hill overlooking the ranch where they had built their life. Zachariah Irving was a mountain man when I met him, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He lived alone because he thought he did not fit anywhere else. But he was wrong. He fit with me. We fit together. And from that fitting we built a family, a legacy, a love that will outlive both of us. He saved me when I was lost, and I would like to think I saved him too. We saved each other. That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves and gives us reason to be better. She paused, looking down at the casket. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life, but I will not mourn the time we did not have. I will celebrate the time we did. 52 years of love is more than enough. It is everything. Lucinda lived another 8 years, passing peacefully in her sleep at 86, surrounded by children and grandchildren who all carried pieces of her strength and Zachariah's gentleness in their hearts. They buried her beside him on that hill, and on her headstone they carved the words she had requested. She drank from frozen streams and never shivered. She was built for this life, and she lived it well. The ranch stayed in the Irving family for generations, passed down from James to his children and to their children, each generation adding their own chapter to the story while remembering the two people who had started it all. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howled down from the mountains, the family would gather and tell the story of Zachariah and Lucinda, of how two broken people found each other in the wilderness and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. They would tell their children about the mountain man who was strong enough to be gentle, about the woman who survived against all odds, about a love that began with an act of kindness beside a frozen stream and grew into something that changed the course of a family forever. And in those stories, Zachariah and Lucinda lived on, their love as enduring as the mountains where they had first found each other, their legacy as vast as the ranch they had built together, their impact immeasurable on every life they had touched. They had started with nothing but each other and had created everything that mattered. That was the power of their love, the triumph of their lives, and the gift they had given to all who came after them. The Irving Ranch prospered for over a century, through wars and depressions, through droughts and floods, through all the changes that transformed the West from wild frontier to modern civilization. But through it all, every generation of Irvings knew the story of their beginning, knew about the woman who did not shiver and the man who saw her strength and fell in love. In the main house, in a place of honor above the fireplace, hung two items that were treated with reverence by every member of the family. The first was the simple gold wedding band Zachariah had traded a winter's worth of pelts to buy, kept carefully preserved in a small wooden box he had carved himself. The second was a photograph taken in 1920, 10 years before Zachariah's death, showing him and Lucinda sitting on the porch of their ranch house, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. In that photograph, you could still see the mountain man in Zachariah's bearing, the strength in his frame, despite his years. And you could still see the steel in Lucinda's eyes, the same determination that had carried her through snow and cold and pain to find a life worth living. They were holding hands in the picture, their fingers intertwined the way they had been intertwined through every joy and challenge of their marriage. That photograph became the heart of the family, a reminder that love was not just emotion but choice, not just passion but partnership, not just romance but respect and commitment and the daily decision to choose each other over and over again. And so the story of Zachariah Irving and Lucinda Emerson Irving became legend, passed down through generations, embellished and remembered and celebrated. But at its core it remained a simple truth. Two people found each other when they needed each other most, and from that finding they built a love that lasted lifetimes and touched hundreds of lives. They had started with nothing, they had ended with everything. And in between, they had lived fully, loved deeply, and created a legacy that would endure as long as anyone remembered to tell their story. On warm summer days, if you walked the land of the Irving Ranch and climbed to the top of the hill where Zachariah and Lucinda were buried, you could look out over thousands of acres of rolling grassland, see cattle bearing the Irving brand, see the house they had made a home, see the evidence of everything they had built together. And if you were very quiet and very still, if you let your imagination run just a little bit wild, you could almost see them there. A tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked dark hair and warm brown eyes, and a woman with steel-gray hair and green eyes that still flashed with determination. You could almost see them walking hand in hand through the land they had loved, through the life they had built, together until the very end, and perhaps even beyond. That was the power of their story. That was the triumph of their love. And that was the legacy they left behind. A legacy not just of land and family, but of hope, of the possibility that even when life seemed darkest, even when you had nothing left but your own strength and determination, you could find someone who saw you truly, loved you completely, and built with you something that would last forever. Zachariah and Lucinda Irving had lived their love story in the Wild West, in a time when life was hard and survival was never guaranteed, when choices had consequences that could not be undone, and strength was measured not just in physical capability, but in the ability to endure. They had faced everything that time could throw at them and had emerged victorious, not because they were perfect, but because they were perfect for each other, and in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.